True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
The Van Breda family enjoyed wealth, travel, and the love of friends and family. They traveled together, had enviable relationships, and the children were educated at some of the best schools from around the world. All 5 family members were living what seemed like a dream life in a luxury estate just outside of Stellenbosch, South Africa. But then everything changed for them overnight in late January of 2015. Join us at the quiet end for What Marli Forgot, the Van Breda Axe Murders. The gruesome murders of patriarch Martin, his wife Teresa, and their adult son Rudi shocked South Africa. A bloody axe identified as coming from the Van Breda residence was recovered at the scene, but there was no indication of forced entry or an outside assailant at all. So could it have been a member of the family who was responsible for this crazy violence that night? The youngest child, 16-year-old Marley, had no recollection of what happened that night. But her 20-year-old brother Henri, who remembered details from that night, did have a story to tell.
For this beer review, I had a very difficult time coming up with a South African beer.
Are they not big on beer, or is it just because they're far away?
Mostly far away. They make plenty of beer.
Oh, because it seems like you don't have much trouble getting Australian beers, but that's just because of the generosity of our listeners from there?
Yes. That's how we did the Australian beers.
Okay.
But this one, what I ended up reviewing was one called Hansa Märzen Gold from South African breweries. Now, despite the Märzen that's in there implying kind of a fest beer or a Oktoberfest type of beer, this is just a European pale lager, 5.2% ABV. And I got to tell you, it's not real great, but that's okay. No. It's pale gold, small white head, got a grainy aroma, some sweet malt. That's pretty much what it tastes like. I would consider this a good beer to drink if you're really thirsty.
That's what you always say if you don't really like them. I'm catching on to that.
That's all we got.
Okay, well, I'm not picky. Let's open up a couple. All right, come on over here with me. And as always, I'm going to let you start us out with this story. So you seemed pretty impressed when I brought this story to you. It was kind of striking to you.
Striking, yes.
Yes, it is so violent.
That's what I got.
Yeah.
And it seems like we haven't done this for a while. I guess we were trying to get ahead of things a little bit while we went away for a little brief trip. Yeah,
we did it a little early last time, but then we did an extra bonus one.
Anyway.
Okie doke.
These horrible murders started in an upstairs bedroom of the Van Breda's spacious home. An attacker repeatedly struck the head of 22-year-old Rudi with an axe as he tried to protect himself with his hands, trying to ward off the vicious blows. He fought hard, grabbed at his attacker, and the axe sliced through his left hand. His pinky finger was just hanging from a thin piece of skin. Blood was running down his neck, over his bare chest, and down onto his boxer shorts and thighs. He struggled to breathe until he finally fell forward, landing face down on his bed. Then either just before or just after Rudi succumbed to his massive injuries, gray-haired Martin, the father, came into the bedroom. He stopped in his tracks when confronted with his son's blood everywhere and the body on the bed. And maybe even before he could fully grasp the situation, the attacker came at him, raised the axe, and landed blows on the older man's head. So death came pretty quickly, however not without severe pain, fear, and shock. His wife and teenage daughter, both terrorized, began running down the hallway toward the stairs leading to the ground floor. They passed by the room where the screaming had suddenly stopped, but the killer blocked their path. The mother, Teresa, rushed straight at the killer, and she was hit on the nose before he aimed the axe straight at her head. She tried to push him back with her right hand, and the blade struck her thumb and the top of her head. When her head snapped forward, a full swing and a hacking blow hit her with fatal force. Teresa fell to the floor. The axe wounded 16-year-old Marley on the right side of her head. She fell down next to her mother, unconscious, and her jugular vein had been partially severed. So you can imagine there was a big amount of blood there.
Yes, it's really remarkable that she survived. So as the sun was rising, domestic workers were walking outside on the Dizals Golf Estate, and that's where they lived. And this was shortly after 7 o'clock. In front of a 2-story house on Goske Street, they saw a bloody young man wearing gray sleeping pants and white socks. Now he was on his cell phone. The group of onlookers grew as the young man talked on the phone, but no one could hear his conversation. At 7:12 a.m., Henri van Breda called 107 emergency number. An operator at the Public Emergency Communications Center in Cape Town answered, and she put the call through to ambulance services, where a female operator spoke to the caller and first operator. So he would talk calmly for several minutes before a police vehicle turned onto Goske Street. A neighbor had already called the emergency number when he realized something strange was happening in the neighborhood. So here, let's listen to a portion of Henri's call. It's very lengthy, so we'll link the full call in our show notes for anyone who would like to hear it in entirety.
107, what is your emergency?
Yeah. I need an ambulance. Lots of...
You need an ambulance?
Yes, please.
What's your name, sir?
Henri from Breda.
Henri. What's the contact number you're phoning from?
My home phone number, but I'm not sure what the home phone number is. My cell phone. We're at 12 Goske Street, please.
What is this number that you're phoning from? Is there someone else that can speak if you're not able to?
No,
Who else is in the house?
there's no one else.
I need the contact number, please.
Yeah, okay. 021
021
8800
8800
493.
493. And you need the ambulance to go to what?
Number 12 Goske Street.
Hoskes.
Goske. G-O-S.
G-O-S. What area is this?
It's in Stellenbosch, and it's in the Zolta estate.
Number 12 Hoskes Street in
Yes.
Stellenbosch.
Yes.
I'm not picking it up for Stellenbosch. I'm picking it up for Boortesig Milnerton.
We're in the Zolta winelands. It's an estate. D-E, and another word, Z-A-L-Z-E.
D-E-Z-A-L-Z-E.
Yeah, D-E.
What? And you don't know what area in Stellenbosch?
I'm not sure how much more specific I need to be.
8800
Yeah, can you please just send an ambulance, or more than one ambulance, to the Zolta winelands in Stellenbosch?
The Zolta?
Yeah, can you find that, please?
What? And you, the patient?
No, my family is... Someone attacked my family.
Hey?
Someone has attacked my family in my house.
Okay, so you need the police or the ambulance.
And an ambulance, please. Yes.
Now, who is injured?
I think everyone.
Everyone in your house?
Everyone, 4 people, yes.
Adults, 2 adults?
2 adults and 3 adults and 1 teenage girl, yes.
What are the injuries?
Head injuries.
Are they conscious?
I don't think so. My sister's moving, but that's it.
Suspects still on scene, there, sir?
Sorry?
Are there any suspects on scene?
No, they ran away.
With what were they attacked?
An axe. I think I blacked out and I've just woken up.
With an axe. Okay, stay on the line. I'm going to speak to the police.
Thank you, but please send an ambulance as quickly as possible.
Yes. Are you the only one that's conscious? You're not
Yes.
The others are unconscious. Hold.
Yes.
I'm going to speak to police to check on your number where you are.
So, what do you think? He really does sound calm, almost like he giggles at the beginning to me.
Yeah, he doesn't sound real concerned.
No, and that would be brought up later on for sure. That would be held against him.
Well, I can see where it would. I mean, this is just a horrible scene.
Yes.
Both parents, his brother, are dead. His sister's gravely injured. He's probably feeling lucky that he himself escaped with minor difficulties.
Well, you would think so, and you think he'd pretty much be hysterical.
Yes, you would be.
So he wasn't, and that would be pointed out later, of course. So a police vehicle stopped in front of the white 2-story house. Sergeant Adrian Clennans and Constable Marius Yonkers got out, removing their service pistols from their holsters as they were walking. So they looked at their surroundings, and they saw Henri, who had a cell phone in his hand. Sergeant Clayen saw the blood on his body and his pants, and he asked him who he was, what had happened, and what was wrong. Henri just mumbled something and pointed to the upstairs of the home. "The problem is upstairs," he said, and sounded pretty calm still. A police officer ordered Henri to wait outside on the stoop. Then he entered the house, leaving one officer with Henri. But by now, the officers really had their guard up, thinking that something very serious may have gone on here. So once inside, the house was eerily quiet. The tiled entrance hall had a staircase with black railings, and the tile was white, so everything really showed. The officer noticed a dark red puddle on the shiny floor tiles. And as he walked up the stairs, he noticed a sour metallic smell. So by now he was expecting the worst, despite Henri's calm demeanor. And he was right. The bodies of 2 women were lying in the hall near a bedroom door next to a bookcase. The older woman, Teresa Van Breda, was dressed in beige panties and a blue top, and she had gaping head wounds. Her face was stark white, of course. She had no blood left in her body, basically. The teenaged girl, Marley Van Breda, had long blonde hair that was drenched with blood. And if not for the blood, she really would have looked like she was sleeping. The officers held onto their guns and continued to move cautiously, realizing that an assailant may have been hiding somewhere in the house still. So in the nearest bedroom, Martin Van Breda was slumped over the top end of a single bed with his knees on the floor. His body and his boxer shorts were soaked with blood. On a nearby floor, a horribly mutilated dark-haired young man, Rudi Van Breda, was lying face down in his shorts. As the officer walked past the women in the hall, he saw the girl's leg twitch slightly. So Marley was alive, and this is the first time they had an indication of that. So paramedics entered the house to attend to Marley, and the other 3 victims were checked and pronounced deceased. Henri himself had only superficial wounds. Marley had a gaping wound to her head, and like you said, Dick, her jugular vein was severed. The paramedics staunched the bleeding and bandaged the wound, and they lifted her carefully onto a stretcher. Now, when they moved her, she moaned in pain, so that was kind of a good sign that she responded anyway.
Certainly was.
They knew that they needed to get her to the hospital as soon as possible before she bled to death. So the paramedics' boots left behind a bloody trail from the upstairs out to the ambulance. Outside of the home, Henri was taken into the ambulance to be examined. So Henri had a small bruise on his forehead. He had 2 long, thin marks across his chest. He had another superficial cut on his right shoulder. He also had a bruised stab wound on his left side, but it had already stopped bleeding. It really was not deep. He also had 4 thin scratches to his left arm, which were parallel to one another. A paramedic shined a light into his eyes to check how his pupils reacted, and they contracted abnormally, which could have been an indication of an unknown substance or a drug in his bloodstream, but we don't know. Yeah.
No, all they're saying is that they contracted abnormally, meaning either they contracted too little or too much.
Right.
So that doesn't tell you too much, except, like you said, maybe there's some drug or unknown substance involved.
Right. What else would cause that?
The other thing I'd consider or be thinking about, here you come to this house and there are 4 people basically hacked to pieces with an axe. And the surviving member who called the police and who called the emergency people had very insignificant minor injuries. So if I'm a policeman, I'm already thinking something's going on here.
Yes.
With that young man.
Well, I know that's your opinion, but I was thinking medically, what's your opinion about the eyes?
No, well, head injuries or trauma, there'd be differences between the 2 pupils.
Okay, and that could be it, because it's really not specific in the reports we read.
Right.
Right.
But it said they contracted abnormally, so they both contracted.
I guess. I really think that's such a vague statement. It doesn't tell me anything.
No, it doesn't.
No.
But it does, I think it rules out trauma to the head, because then you'd have different reactions between the 2 pupils.
Right. Plus, there was no evidence of any trauma to his head anyway, so
right.
Kind of a moot point there.
Sure is.
So members of the police's forensic unit put a blood-stained axe and a kitchen knife in plastic bags and labeled them. So these items would be tested for DNA, including touch DNA, DNA that's transferred in skin cells on an object when it's handled or touched. The axe looked brand new, according to those who saw it. In fact, it still had a price sticker on it. One of the police officers then brought the family dog, Sasha, over to Henri. He'd found her in the garage, so that would be another curious thing that we'll get into. Now, meanwhile, reporters, photographers, and a TV news team arrived at the scene. And from where they were stopped behind a taped-off area, they posted tweets and took photos and video footage of police officers and the forensic team doing their jobs. Reporters did talk to some of the neighbors, too. The bystanders were staring at the Van Breda house with shocked and confused expressions on many of their faces. One of these was Felicity Lewis, a domestic worker on the estate. So earlier she had seen Henri standing in front of the house. His eyes had such a funny look, as if they were looking far, far into the distance, and he just stood there, she told one reporter. Apparently, there was urine running down one of his legs and into his sock. Still, he'd waved to the neighbors as if it was a perfectly normal morning. So could that have just been someone in shock? I guess so. But that was looked upon curiously as well.
Well, I would look at it curiously.
Yeah. So Martin Locke, a neighbor of the family and a well-known sports commentator from the 1980s, watched the scene from beyond the cordoned-off area, and he was with his fiancée, Jeanette. He called out to Henri, who was standing off to one side, but Henri just stared straight ahead. So later, Martin walked off and watched from further away as members of the forensic team removed black plastic containers from a vehicle and carried them into the house. So these were probably body bags. A resident who lived further down on Gosk Street confided to him and another neighbor. Some of the neighbors heard sounds of a row coming from the house, or an argument.
And then later that morning, Henri's girlfriend, Bianca van der Westhuizen, showed up. She had seen that Henri had tried to reach on her cell phone several times. She was with Alex Boshoff, a close friend of Henri's. Bianca was crying and inconsolable as Henri put his arm around her. Now at this point, he's also crying. Alex comforted him and cried along with him. So at this point, the media didn't know where in the house the bodies were. Aside from knowing that the Van Breda family lived in the house, information about the attack and the victims was scarce. Henri was taken to the hospital to have his wounds treated. At the hospital, they drew blood, swabbed under his fingernails, and did a DNA swab from his inner cheek.
So forensic teams continued to move in and out of the house as photographers tried to get clear shots of the front. The cordoned-off area stretched to 3 houses down from the Van Breda house. The police and emergency vehicles, as well as the 2 trees that were in front of the house, obscured their view. Some did get permission to take photos from the neighbors' balconies. As time passed, information was shared. 54-year-old Martin Van Breda was an affluent businessman. His wife was 55-year-old Teresa, who was a homemaker. Rudi, their oldest child, was a 22-year-old student at the University of Melbourne. Their other son was Henri. Their daughter Marley, 16, went to a private school, and the family was originally from Pretoria. So most of the members of the media were still at the scene in the late afternoon of January 27, 2015, when Eben Potgieter, chairman of the De Salze Homeowners Association, and Boet Grobler, the estate manager, finally decided to have a news conference. Immediately after the bodies were discovered, Eben told them, he instructed the head of security on the estate to find out if the perimeter fence had been breached in any way, because this was a secured estate.
Well, that's putting it mildly. This is like a fortress.
It kind of is, and you do see that. It's not, I don't know if I'd say common, but it is seen quite a bit in South Africa because of the high crime rate. But there was no sign of forced entry into the estate. No one had signed the visitor's registrar to visit Gosk Street the previous day or night either. So according to him, there seemed to be no signs of a break-in at the house.
And that day, the police took Henri in for questioning. He was asked to give a formal statement. While at the police station, Henri told them that he had a stutter and had difficulty speaking. To detectives, the young man seemed quiet, although the shock could have caused him to act strangely. Others would remember that he reeked of alcohol and was cocky at first, but his attitude changed later when an officer told him that his sister had started talking.
Well, that would fit if he had been responsible, wouldn't it?
It sure would. What's she going to talk about, right?
Exactly.
So in his witness statement, Henri said that an unknown person had attacked his family. The night before, he said he and his father had 2 glasses of wine and a glass of whiskey together. Rudi went for a run sometime before dinner, and the family sat down for dinner about 7:15 that night. Afterwards, Henri said they watched some TV, then his father and sister went to bed around 9. He didn't know where his mother was at that point. Then Rudi and Henri went to bed at around 11. Henri stayed up and watched the anime One Piece on his laptop until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's the 27th. After that, he listened to some music to help him fall asleep. He got up at one point to use the bathroom, taking his phone into the bathroom with him, and that's when he heard loud noises coming from the bedroom that he shared with Rudi.
Yeah, Henri said that he opened the bathroom door a crack and peeked into the bedroom. This is when he saw someone standing over his brother, attacking him with an axe. He said he was too afraid to help his brother, but he shouted for help. He thinks his father must have heard him because his father came running into the room and switched on the light. He said his father lunged for the attacker, but he was struck on the head with the axe. The intruder attacked his father, then his mother, and finally his little sister. Then the attacker returned to the bedroom, he said, laughed, and came at Henri. Henri tried to fight him as he came toward him. He said they struggled for the axe, and Henri managed to take the axe from the attacker. He said the attacker stepped back a little and took out a knife, coming at Henri again. That's when, he said, the attacker stabbed him on his left side. And that's when Henri hit the attacker with the blunt side of the axe in his right shoulder. He said the man ran down the stairs and Henri pulled the knife from his side, dropping it on the floor. He followed the attacker downstairs and threw the axe at him. But during this motion, he said, he tripped and fell. He got up then, assuming that the intruder had run away. When he got to the first floor, he saw that the back door was open, and he looked outside but didn't see anyone. So he went back inside and tried to call his girlfriend, and it went straight to voicemail. So he walked up the stairs and started Googling for emergency numbers.
Oh, really?
There's a lot wrong with this statement, and he will change some of it as well.
He's going to have to.
So what's bothering you about it particularly?
Well, again, everyone's been attacked with an axe, and I guess he sort of was, but he ended up being stabbed.
Stabbing is really a stretch to say. Yeah, it was more of a little slice.
It was a stretch when people got to look at it closely.
Yes, absolutely, right.
And the other thing that really bothered me was after this bloodbath at his house, he tries to call his girlfriend first.
Yeah, that's weird.
And then he's walking upstairs and Googling for emergency numbers. I mean, it's simple. It's 107 or whatever.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more, too.
I don't like that.
What about the coming into the bedroom and laughing at him? That's kind of weird, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so, too. But anyway, his story's not over. He said once he got back upstairs, he realized that his mom and sister were lying in the hallway, so he says he didn't know that they'd been hurt yet. And upon seeing this, he said he fainted and fell on the stairs and was knocked unconscious. Then sometime after, he doesn't know how long, he regained consciousness and called the emergency services on his cell phone. And by then, it was light outside.
Yeah, so now we have a convenient time lapse because he's unconscious.
I know.
Supposedly.
So we've got, I think it turned out to be like 2.5 hours, we're guessing. 2 hours, 43 minutes might have been the precise thing I heard of him saying he was lying there.
Yeah, and we've done some episodes where the emergency call occurs some hours after the mishap.
Well, sure, mishap.
And
this is a hell of a mishap, but
sure
yeah.
Is. But I'm saying that that's a red flag too.
Of course.
The time lapse between the crime being committed and when the emergency services are called.
Yeah, I think we agree there are many, many problems with his statement. So we'll get into that more definitely. After Henri was done talking with the police, he was taken to a family friend's house. And there he was told that his brother and father and mother were all dead. His sister Marley had had surgery and she'd survived, but she was still in critical condition, so that was still undetermined how she was going to do. But the family's relatives and friends were now dealing with a devastating reality. Martin and Teresa and Rudi had been violently murdered with an axe. Now Henri and Marley were orphans, and Henri might end up being the only survivor because Marley's condition was critical. Now she was kept under constant police guard in the hospital in case someone came back and tried to get her. thinking she's a witness. Even her close relatives were banned from visiting her, and that includes Henri. So that makes me wonder right there. Well, not even wonder. I'm pretty sure that the detectives right away were looking at Henri.
I'll bet they were.
I mean, if nothing else, there was no breach of security. How do you overcome that? This is a place with a lot of security.
That'd be with great difficulty.
Absolutely. So Gusk Street remained cordoned off for 3 days, and the house for several days more as the scene was processed. The established residents knew very little about the Van Breda family. Eventually, however, friends and relatives would share their stories. And their stories were of a family that, after years of living in Australia, had decided to return to South Africa and to live in this exclusive, high-security neighborhood. A close friend of Teresa would talk about their close friendship that began before the births of their children. So her family and the Van Bredas actually saw a lot of each other when the children were young, and both families lived in the Willows, near Pretoria. All 3 of their children were born there. Teresa and Martin were thrilled when the 3rd child was a girl, and Marley was the sweet one. Rudi was the high achiever, and Henri was kind of the loner.
So he was the outlier.
Well, I don't know if I'd say outlier, maybe as he got older, but he was just the more quiet to himself one.
And on the morning of the murders, this friend had been trying to reach Teresa. And later, she called another female friend who told her something terrible has happened. Teresa, Martin, and Rudi were hacked to death with an axe. That's not a phone call you expect to ever receive, is it?
Well, no, that's very shocking, of course.
Martin's friends all agreed that he had excelled at his work and become a wealthy man. But he was always surrounded by his wife and 3 children. They seemed to be a close-knit family. They went on many expensive holidays together. The children attended the best schools. Martin was considered to be a strict but loving father.
Yeah, now these were wealthy people. Not just, having a little bit of money. They were extremely wealthy.
They were pretty wealthy.
Yes. So Martin was born back in 1960, and he seemed to have a normal, happy upbringing. After earning a degree in civil engineering at Stellenbosch University, Martin completed his MBA at the University of Pretoria. His business friends remembered him as a visionary who exploited high potential possibilities in education, home security, and the property market. So he had the ability to find business opportunities, draw up business plans, and then run them successfully. Martin held directorships of various investment, property, and education companies too. Schools and quality education were really his passion. Woodhill College in Pretoria, which he established himself, he saw as his greatest accomplishment. That school caters to students from grades R to 12 and has a Christian foundation. So Martin was thrilled when he sold this to Curro Holdings, and that was for 185 million rands, which is about $10 million, and that was in 2012, so just 3 years before the murders. His concern about the high crime levels in the country, though, prompted him to help find solutions. So that's when he became a co-founder of Netstar, which provided the technology for the tracking and recovering of stolen vehicles.
Yeah, this guy was, I think, looking at his accomplishments, he was basically a genius.
Yeah, he really was a brilliant man. He didn't just fall into his wealth.
Oh, no.
No, he knew what he was doing. And Teresa was no dummy either.
No, she wasn't.
It was said that it was love at first sight when Martin and Teresa met, and that was in 1983. Both worked in Pretoria Street in Pretoria at the time, and Teresa, one of 7 children, had grown up in the Johannesburg suburb of Florida. Encouraged by her father, Dr. Rudi Dutoit, she studied computer science. Teresa then worked for IBM and later in banking. That was all before she married Martin. So both were very career-oriented, and they dated for 7 years before they married. So these were people who thought things through. They were not making any hasty decisions. They thought through their lives, planned it out, and it seemed to be working for them.
Yeah, you would call them a power couple, wouldn't you?
You really could, yes. According to Elna Venter, who had introduced the couple to each other, they were both friendly, industrious people who had worked their way to the top of their professions. And the young couple's favorite pastime was kind of curious. They liked to watch John Wayne films.
Okay.
Which is kind of weird.
Well, I like John Wayne films too, but
I don't know if I've ever really watched one, to be honest.
You've seen True Grit?
Nope.
Oh,
I've seen the remake, I think, with Kurt Russell.
It doesn't count.
No. But they're Westerns, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was supposed to be very macho. So maybe one of the first action figure types before Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis and all that. And Claude Van Damme, all those guys.
Well, he was definitely one of the early tough guys.
Yes, absolutely. So I thought that was kind of cute that that's what they like to do because it doesn't sound anything like them. I guess it was an escape from reality.
Well, it's like us sitting around watching horror films.
Yeah, it's an escape.
Yep. So at an early stage of the marriage, Martin had already told Teresa he would like his children to study at his alma mater, Stellenbosch University, one day. He took his family on frequent trips to exciting destinations, but they also spent many holidays at their various luxury homes. They lived in a posh suburb in Pretoria for years, but the high crime rate sometimes caused Martin to wonder whether he should take his family out of the country. And then he acquired the Australian subsidiary of the German property group Engel & Volkers. So, in 2006, the Van Bredas moved to Australia. Their new home was an elegant brick 2-story house in Claremont, Perth. It had 4 spacious bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a double garage. Martin's workplace was in a modern office complex in the business district of Perth. This clean start in the relatively safer environments of Australia excited him.
Yeah, so at that time, the 6-year-old Marley was enrolled at the Presbyterian Ladies' College in the city, and Rudi, then 12, and Henri, 10, became students at the prestigious Scotch College, a private school for boys. Now, Rudi's endearing nature soon made him extremely popular with the classmates, and he developed a wide circle of friends and regularly shared photos on social media. In time, he really became a model of success, both in sports, because he excelled at rugby, team rowing, water polo, and tennis, and academically. So,
those firstborns.
I know, it had to be a lot for Henri to live up to, which he probably couldn't. But Rudi seemed a lot like his parent.
Yeah.
Teresa had become a homemaker, and she often went swimming with her children in the sea. Rudi got his science degree at the University of Melbourne, and it seemed like he would eventually follow in his father's footsteps. In Henri's teenage years, on the other hand, he spent most of his time at the computer playing games. He was always just happy to be on his own with only his laptop for company, and he rarely socialized. After matriculating at Scotch College in 2012, Henri registered for a degree in physics at the same university as his brother. Then, after 7 years in Perth, the family had to move again. Engel & Volkers had opened a new office in a waterfront development north of Brisbane on Queensland's Sunshine Coast, and they were looking for someone to run it. To Martin, this was a new challenge and a really good business opportunity. So the Van Breda's next home was an impressive 2-story house on a 9-acre plot. This house had 6 bedrooms on the first floor and 3 on the top level.
It's quite a move up.
I know. But maybe housing there was a little less expensive. I'm not sure. But this was a big house because it also had 3 bedrooms on the top level, each with an ensuite bathroom and a veranda with sea and forest views. So Marley was 13 years old at the time, and she loved the new school. So she and her friends routinely explored the city, had fun at the beach, or went shopping together.
Now, after a couple of years there, Martin had to close the office because of financing issues. But then in 2014, another opportunity presented itself. And that would be opening a private school in South Africa. Martin had decided that he would return home with Teresa and Marley. Rudi and Henri had to complete their studies in Melbourne before joining them permanently. Martin's wish to live in Stellenbosch was happening. He had always hoped Marley would attend Stellenbosch University, as he had done years before Marley had done years before. Marley, too, was thrilled to be back, especially because the family would be closer to their South African relatives, and she could see them more often. Marley, too, was thrilled to be back, especially because the family would be closer to their South African relatives, and she could see them much more often.
Yeah, so the couple bought the White House at 12 Gosk Street in Stellenbosch and moved into their new home in March 2014. Stellenbosch is a beautiful area in the Western Cape of South Africa. It's near the banks of the East River and at the foot of the Stellenbosch Mountains. It's a popular tourist destination with vineyards, and of course, Stellenbosch University is there. Their new neighborhood was in golf estates set on a luxurious golf course with a club and just gorgeous swimming pools. That August, Henri joined them from Australia. he had decided to take a gap year from his studies, but rumors would circulate that he had dropped out of the university. Rudi did join the family just over a week before Christmas. In January 2015, Marley started her school year at Somerset College. This English-speaking private school is among the most expensive in the country, and it was just a 10-minute drive from their new home. So, my God, these people just seem to have it made. I'm a little jealous. You know, it's a life. It's quite a life they're living.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could live in a compound like they lived in. I'd feel almost to be in prison.
I can see that, but I think if you're going to live in that area, you'd want it because there's so much crime.
You would?
You'd want it. So, yeah, I see that. I mean, there's a downside to everything. So on January 23rd, Teresa called her brother Henri to congratulate him on his 61st birthday. So that's like 3-4 days before the murders. And they had a lengthy conversation. The coming weekend, she told him, would be the last one the family would be all together before Rudi returned to university the following week. Henri would fly back to Australia in the second term after first doing a diving course in Sadwana Bay on the KwaZulu-Natal coast. So that's the kind of thing you have to be rich to do, I'm assuming.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're living in this great house. They can kind of pick and choose when they go back to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it is the luxurious life. Whether it's the life we would choose is a different story, but it's something that a lot of people would be envious of. We can say that for sure. So on Saturday, January 24th, Martin took his family on a long-promised shark cage diving experience. On Sunday, the family enjoyed a last family dinner before Rudi's return to college. Now, Monday was a sweltering, humid day, and by bedtime it still hadn't cooled off. Martin and his sons were wearing only boxer shorts. Everyone slept upstairs. Rudi and Henri shared a bedroom overlooking the street, and down the hall on the opposite side, Marley and their parents slept in adjoining rooms.
So in the dead of night, a bedroom light went on in a neighbor's house. The children who lived there claimed they had heard raised voices coming from 12 Goska Street. Then it got quiet again. The next morning, Teresa's sister Narita texted a joke to Teresa. When she hadn't responded by 10:30, Narita became concerned and called her brother Francois. She could hear from his voice that something was wrong. And then he broke the shocking news that Martin, Teresa, and Rudi had been slashed to death with an axe and that Marley was in critical condition. Henri had only minor injuries.
So a prayer service for Marley was held at her new school, and her best friend, Mia Bashaw from Johannesburg, posted a photo of the two of them on Facebook. Her brother's former headmaster at Scotch College, Alec O'Connell, expressed his school's sympathy and said that Henri and Rudi were active students in the college. In a bizarre incident on the night of the same day as the Axe Murders, a close friend of both Martin and Teresa, Marie Goose, took her own life. So 72-year-old Marie had cancer, and the news about her friends' deaths affected her very deeply, her family said. And later that same night, as the couple was driving, Marie shot herself while she was still in the passenger seat.
So they're driving along and she pulls out a gun and shoots herself?
That's how the story goes. I mean,
Holy
maybe
cow. They
they were parked at a light or something, but they were in the car. So incredibly sad and shocking, of course. The Van Breda's bodies were cremated, so there were no coffins at the funeral service, which was held on February 19th. Henri wasn't seen at the service, and many doubted afterwards that he was ever there. But Henri's uncle, Andre Van Breda, later said, "Of course Henri was at the memorial service. His nephew was traumatized," he said, and both sides of the family were supporting him. So once the funeral was over, the media focus turned to the Van Breda's will and the distribution of their assets. And of course that was going to happen because they had a lot of money.
Yeah.
A family spokesperson confirmed that their 3 children and the Rudell Holdings Trust were the beneficiaries of the couple's wealth. Updates were received about Marley's condition, which was continuing to improve. Now she could move all of her limbs, but she wasn't really speaking yet, just a word here or there.
Then on March 7th, Marley was moved to a rehab center so she could continue her long recovery. Marley and Henri were looking at inheriting approximately 200 million rand, which is about 11 million US dollars. 3 months after the murders, a report claimed that the life insurance policies of the murdered Van Bredas could not yet be paid out, possibly because of uncertainty about who was entitled to the money. According to one source, the family of the two young heirs approached the police for a letter confirming that no evidence existed that would link Henri or Marley to the murders. The police either could not or would not issue this letter.
And that's a red flag. At least makes your ears perk up a bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, insurance is balking at paying them. I realize it's a significant amount of money.
Sure, but normally, I don't think they would delay paying children their parents' inheritance. Of course, this is an extreme circumstance. It's a murder.
Yeah.
Now, some of the relatives believed that the inheritance should go to Marley only, and there were others who believed both children were entitled to it. Marley's massive medical costs were an issue, as well as the costs of the legal team that had been hired to protect Henri's interests. So if Henri were to become the accused killer, the expenses could be astronomical. And there was another nagging question. Could the bloody hand benefit in any way from the estate? So in terms of the bloody hand principle, which is a law in South Africa, similar to a law we have here, a murderer may not inherit from his or her victim, but there is uncertainty as far as maintenance is concerned, like paying for the lawyer, things like that. If Henri were arrested, would all the trustees agree that his legal expenses should be paid from the trust? The police had not identified a suspect, and Lorinda van Niekerk, a member of Henri's legal team, insisted that Henri's instructions to them were privileged. She did confirm that the police took possession of Henri's passport, along with those of the other family members. The family spokesperson said that Henri was receiving counseling, that he was coping under the circumstances, and the last thing on his mind was money.
By late April, Marley had recovered enough to be discharged from the rehab facility. She had her own attorney assigned to her, and a photo of her, along with a statement, was released to the media, stating that because of her head injuries, she had retrograde amnesia. She had no memory of the night of the attack and the murders of her family members. In fact, she had no memory for the days leading up to the attack. So as you can imagine, that was a major setback for the investigators.
Well, yeah, they've been waiting to hear from her.
Yeah, they think, well, we've got an eyewitness who survived. We'll find out what's going on.
Yeah, I think the lead detective had really expected her to tell them her brother had done it, because that's where he was leaning.
Well, yeah.
But soon after her release, Marley posted several photos of her parents, Rudi and herself, and captioned them with "the people I love most." Soon after her release, Marley posted several photos of her parents, Rudi and herself, captioning them with "the people I love most." But this did not include any photos of Henri, so that was interesting.
Was that ever asked of her? Why wasn't Henri in the picture?
Oh, I'm sure, but I mean, we're not privy to that information. I'm sure privately it was speculated on and discussed. Who knows what she said about it in private, but publicly she did not say why she did that. She did see Henri, though, for the first time since the murders on June 13th, 2015, so almost 6 months from the murders. And the family would say that it was a very emotional reunion and they were happy to see each other. Eventually, Marley even returned to school, and Henri enrolled in chef's school. At chef's school, Henri met Daniela Janzi Rensburg. They fell in love and were together all the time. But rumors were circulating about Henri. People who had known him in Melbourne said that he was well known to abuse drugs, and he was actually suspended from the university for substance use. He was not taking a gap year, as he'd said. Henri had actually been a patient at a substance abuse treatment center, and his parents had been watching him closely since he had been released. A longtime friend of Teresa also came forward to say that after the murders, her sons had told her that Rudi had confided in them that Henri had been abusing drugs. Teresa had not said anything to her, but that wasn't surprising, really. The Van Bredas were a family who did not share their private problems with others. So maybe things weren't so perfect as they looked, which is usually the case in life. But residents of a homeless camp near the family's neighborhood also came forward to say that they knew Henri well. He was someone who regularly bought drugs from people in that area. So the police were now looking at Henri as a person of interest in his family's murders, and of course in the attempted murder of his sister Marley. So now we're going to discuss the medical examiner's report on the 3 murder victims. The head injuries of Martin, Teresa, and Rudi were among the most horrific the state pathologist, Dr. Daphne Anthony, had ever seen in her career. A police source would later say that the injuries looked as if they were caused by something similar to wood chopping with an axe. So first, Martin. His face, hair, and body were blood-stained. The ME noted external sharp and blunt trauma involving his head and central upper back. There was no evidence of any defensive wounds. He had multiple skull fractures and brain injuries. There was blood in his nostrils, mouth, pharynx, trachea, and bronchi, and stomach. The cause of his death was recorded as head injury. He had a massive skull fracture extending from the front to the back and linear fractures across the floor of the cranial cavity at his back. So his cause of death was noted as head injury and consequences thereof, unnatural cause. Then Teresa was examined next. She had 2 large lacerations on the back of her head on the right side, and the ME noted several loose skull bone fragments as well as underlying damaged brain tissue. At the top of her scalp, to the back and to the right, there was a penetrating incised wound, and there were small contusions on the right area of her lower back. She also had abrasions on the bridge of her nose and blood in her mouth and nostrils. Her lungs had both collapsed. A 2-centimeter wound on her right thumb suggested that she may have tried to defend herself and block the axe. 2 blood specimens and fingernail scrapings were taken, and the ME noted again, cause of death, head injury, and consequences thereof, unnatural cause. The third body was 22-year-old Rudi. His face, hair, and body were blood-stained. The findings included external sharp and blunt trauma involving the head and left lateral upper neck, with brain injuries, small abrasions on the right knee and both wrists, a small wound on the left little finger, and a loose nail on the same finger that all suggested defensive wounds. His left lung had collapsed, and there was blood in his stomach. So his cause of death was the same as his parents, head injury and consequences thereof.
So as a state witness in a future criminal case, Dr. Anthony would be able to testify that the 22-year-old Rudi was attacked mainly on the left side of his head and body. So that meant that the attacker was right-handed.
And Henri was right-handed, just to let you know.
I'm getting that impression.
Okay.
The forensic report on the Van Breda family cell phones and computers came to the attention of the media. One of the cell phones was used to search the internet for information regarding the axe attack on Peter and Joan Porco in the United States in November 2004.
That's a case we've covered.
We have?
I didn't look up the date and title of it, but if you search Porco on our website, you can find the show we did on that case as well.
Christopher Porco, who was a 21-year-old man at the time, attacked his parents with a fireman's axe after they had confronted him about his poor grades at university and his out-of-control spending. His father died on the scene. His mother survived, but her face was severely disfigured. As recalled, she continued to defend her son.
Yes, at first, when she first got the injury, she had said it was her son. But then after she had healed and everything, she said she didn't remember and she didn't believe it was him. So yes, she supported him. Probably still does, as far as I know.
Yeah, we haven't heard differently.
No. The user of the cell phone, though, had also looked for information on how long it takes to bleed to death. A made-for-TV drama titled Romeo Killer, the Chris Porco story, was also allegedly watched on Henri's cell phone. And more suspicious bits of information about Henri started showing up in the media. Friends of the family claimed that there was a great discord at number 12 Goska Street in the week before the murders. In the preceding weeks, Henri gave his parents a rough time. He had insomnia, and Teresa had to take him to a nurse in Goska Street at night. They also said that Henri struggled with severe mood swings.
So let's fast forward to June 2016. This is about a year and a half after the murders. On June 13th, the media was notified that Henri would be prosecuted. They had an arrest warrant for Henri. He turned himself in that afternoon. Henri was charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of tampering with a crime scene. Henri entered a plea of not guilty and was released on bail with strict restrictions.
Yeah, he wasn't allowed to have contact with any of the state's witnesses, which included Marley and other family members. So he was basically estranged from his relatives at that point. He and his girlfriend Daniela went from guest house to guest house with no permanent residence. But many of the guest house owners had negative experiences with the couple. They said they left messes behind wherever they went, and they weren't considerate or respectful. So then one day, while Daniela and Henri were at the beach, their car was searched by a crime prevention task force. They found marijuana in their car, but Daniela said the marijuana was hers and that Henri had not even known it was there. They were kept in jail overnight, but the case was later thrown out and charges were dropped.
Henri's trial for the murders began April 24th, 2017. Daniela would support him throughout. Henri said that 2, or maybe even 3 people, had entered his family's home in January 2015, attacking him and the rest of his family members.
Yeah, remember his initial police statement said one attacker.
Now up to maybe even 3.
Yes.
The prosecution needed to determine if it would have been possible for someone to enter the house, as well as the probability of anyone getting in. Also, there were almost 3 hours between the time of the attack and Henri's call for help. He stated that he had been unconscious during this time. So what really happened during that time frame was a big question, and Henri's plea in court did not match what he had told the police in his statement right after the attacks.
The first officer to arrive at the scene testified that when he first entered the house, everything on the first floor looked normal. He said it was only when he got to the stairs that he saw that something was terribly wrong. There was an open purse downstairs with a wallet and money still inside. A laptop was plugged into the wall. An expensive watch was just lying there. Henri had confirmed that nothing was missing from the house, so it didn't look like a burglary had occurred. There was also no sign of anyone breaking into the house. The neighborhood of De Salza is categorized as a medium security estate. It has an electric fence, which had an alarm that would be set off if it was touched or damaged at all. There was a surveillance system which was monitored 24 hours a day. There were security guards making regular rounds of the property, and some areas even had anti-dig foundations under the fences to keep intruders out. Now this is where I'm going in the event of an apocalypse. Perfect, right?
Well, except you need to have food and water.
Oh yeah, I bet these people have well-stocked kitchens. Now the vehicle access points were manned 24 hours a day too, and there were heat signature cameras which would pick up any people or large animals if they came within 20 meters of the fence. If any alarm was activated, a guard would be sent to investigate, and the alarm could only be canceled and reset after it was confirmed that no breaches had been made.
So I said earlier, this is a fortress.
Yeah, it really is.
Now I'm thinking it's more like a maximum security prison.
It kind of is. So on the night before and the morning of the murders, no breaches or unusual events had occurred. The last sign-in at the gate the night before was at 11:57 p.m. No one reported seeing any suspicious vehicles or people on the estate. 5 perimeter checks were done of the entire property between 6 p.m. on January 26th and 7 a.m. on January 27th. It was also noted that the Van Breda house was towards the middle of this estate, so an intruder would have had to bypass a lot of other houses to get there. If this had been a random break-in, it really made no sense for the perpetrator to go all the way to the Van Breda house. If it was not a random break-in or a robbery, and remember nothing was stolen, the police had to look into anyone who may have had issues with a member of the Van Breda family. But no enemies of any of the family members were found. There was no reason for anyone to target them. There were no unknown footprints, fingerprints, or DNA found in the house or on any of the victims.
Once a random crime and a targeted crime were eliminated, that left Henri as the only possible perpetrator. Additionally, the family's domestic worker confirmed that the axe and the knife had come from that house. She said that they had kept a similar-looking axe either in the garage, next to the fireplace, or in the pantry. She had last seen it in the pantry, which was just a couple of feet away from the drawer where the knife had come from.
In his testimony, Henri said that he didn't know about an axe being kept at the house. It also made no sense for an intruder to arrive without their own weapons. If there had been 2 or more intruders, then why had one intruder held the knife and the axe during these attacks? No other weapons were found on the scene, and no other knives had been removed from any of the drawers.
So in the trial, there was a lot said about Henry's emergency call. He had sounded so calm on the phone. Due to his calm demeanor, the operator at first thought that it was a prank call. The call lasted about 25 minutes, as the operator tried to find the location within the estate. But Henry never sounds frustrated or panicked, even though all his family members had been seriously injured. There are also several emergency numbers posted on the refrigerator. He could have called one of these numbers, but he instead wasted time Googling for emergency numbers. He also took time to smoke a cigarette before he made the call. He said that he did this to calm himself down and to prevent him from stuttering. The cigarette butts from Henry were found on the kitchen floor. Teresa and Martin had a rule of no smoking in the house, so the prosecution said that leaving the butts on the floor could have been an act of hostility and disrespect toward his recently murdered parents.
Yeah, I think they were saying, it would be like a fuck you, Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
Now you're dead and I can do whatever I want. But Henry said it was just a stressful situation and that his parents would have understood him smoking in the house.
Sure.
A neighbor living across from the Van Breda home testified in court about the night before the murders. She said that about 10 p.m. on the 26th, she heard loud male voices in what sounded like an argument. The argument ended around midnight. In his statement, Henry had said that his father went to bed around 9 p.m., but in his court plea, Henry said that his father had been working on his laptop after dinner and that he, Rudi, and their father had watched Star Trek II after he'd finished working. He said that the movie must have been what the neighbor had heard, but the prosecution argued that this was something Henry had made up later to match with what the neighbor had said. The neighbor said that it was definitely not a movie that she heard. The same witness testified that both of her children woke up around 4 a.m. on the 27th. She didn't understand why they had awoken because this was very unusual. But her children's room faced the balcony of the room where Rudi and Martin were killed. Still, family and friends did testify that they knew of no issues between the Van Breda family members. They thought the family got along fine.
And then in regards to the family dog being found in the garage, the domestic worker for the Van Bredas testified that Sasha was a house dog who did not go outside very much. There are dog beds in just about every room in the house. So it was very unusual for Sasha the dog to be in the garage. There was no blood on her paws, and Henry said that she was old and not a barker. But the domestic worker did say that Sasha barked at her every time she arrived at the house. So when asked if he had locked the dog in the garage while he attacked his family members, Henry said no. But Sasha could be heard barking in the background of the emergency call. If she had been in the house, she likely would have been checking on the family members, or she would have walked around looking for them. Sasha did always sleep in the house, so if she had been shut into the garage, she would have been barking and scratching to get inside.
Yeah, the dog thing's interesting because he even said something about her being on medication. She was an older dog, and he claimed that she was on medication 1 week a month or every other week, I forget exactly, where she would be incapacitated for a week, which I found very strange, and I would have loved to hear from her veterinarian, but wasn't able to get those details. But that, as someone who's had dogs her whole life, that just seems like nonsense to me. I can't think of any kind of medication where you're just incapacitated for a week.
Nope.
No. So that was very odd. So Henri did look very clean in photos of him in the ambulance in his boxer shorts the morning of the murders. But he had been wearing socks and gray shorts over those boxers, and those items had blood spatter on them from Rudi, Teresa, and Martin. For the spatter stains to get on his clothing, he would have had to been facing the source of the blood during the attacks. In the areas where Henri said he had been during the attacks, there were no blood stains at all. There was none of Marley's blood on Henri's clothing, but experts said that the spatter from Marley's injuries may have gone directionally away from him. The defense argued that it was impossible for Marley's blood and DNA not to be found on Henri if he had been her attacker, but the defense didn't do any of their own testing to prove their theory in court. Now, the most interesting part about that is the initial attack where he says he was hiding behind the bathroom door as Rudi was being attacked, and then subsequently his father in the same room. But if that were the case, how would blood get on his shorts and socks if he was behind the door?
No, that's a very good question, isn't it?
Yeah, so that just drew into question his position during these attacks.
Right.
What he was saying did not add up. Now remember, Henri had claimed that he hit the attacker with the blunt side of the axe, but no foreign blood or DNA was found on the axe, on Henri, or anywhere at the scene, in fact. Henri argued in court that not all of the blood on his body had been tested, though. But that just seems like kind of a lame excuse there. He had no proof to back that up.
No, they're reaching a little bit.
Well, you have to at certain circumstances, yeah. The prosecution suggested that Henri had cleaned himself up after the murders. He then decided not to try and dispose of his bloody shorts and socks because he would look too clean if he did that. It made no sense that his shorts and socks had blood spatter, but his skin only had a small amount of his own blood from his minor wounds. So this means that he cleaned himself up before making self-inflicted injuries on his own body. Henri also had no blood on his hands, even though he said he'd fought with the assailant and got the axe away from him at one point. Considering the real bloodbath that had taken place inside the home, the axe handle was very clean as well. No blood had dripped on the axe handle, and there were no bloody fingerprints on the handle. So the prosecution said that Henri had obviously rinsed off the axe handle before police arrived. In his testimony, Henri said that the attacker was wearing gloves on his hands.
He's got an answer for everything.
Well, you kind of have to. He's really speaking out for his life at this point because he's going to be in prison.
Well, I think he's heading that way.
Yeah, definitely.
DNA was found under Henri's fingernails. Primary source of that DNA was Rudi. The defense argued that Henri had held the axe during a struggle with an assailant, and that could be how he got Rudi's blood under his nails. But pictures of Henri in the ambulance showed that his hands and arms were clean. Never in a statement to police or his plea in court did Henri say he had washed his hands.
Now that's interesting because he did give two statements which kind of contradicted each other, but neither one of them gave any information about why his hands were so clean. The duvet color from Henri's bed was found folded up in a loose ball and put near where Rudi's body was found. It was actually put over the drag marks after the dragging motion had stopped. So this means that Rudi was dragged from the bed, and then the duvet was placed over the blood. There was no indication that Rudi had tried to pull himself up, and there was also a transfer stain of blood on the duvet that had been made by the knife being put on top of it while the duvet was still on the bed. The physical evidence proved that someone had moved Rudi, the duvet, and the knife around in the bedroom after the attacks. Then it had been rolled up and placed on the blood on the floor. So that looked really bad for Henri.
The bathroom off the bedroom was tested for blood. Several places reacted. DNA was taken from blood in the shower. There was a mixture of blood from Henri, Teresa, and Rudi. Henri claimed that he, his father, and Rudi all routinely shaved in the shower, and there may have been some blood from that. Prosecution, however, believed Henri had cleaned himself and the axe handle in that shower.
Well, I mean, that just made more sense, to be honest.
Yeah.
So what about that supposed 2 hours and 43 minutes missing between the attacks and the call to emergency services? The prosecution said that Henri had been using the time to wait for his family members to die, to set up the scene, and to think of what he would say. He knew, though, that he'd have to make the call before 7:30 a.m., because that's when the domestic worker was due to arrive. The defense had a physician testify on behalf of Henri about a condition he had recently been diagnosed with. So this doctor testified in court that while Henri was with Daniela one night and they were having wine, he suddenly stopped speaking, fell backwards on the bed, and started shaking. He had had a seizure, and when he came out of it, he did not remember what had happened, and he spoke as if he was drunk. Henri went to see a neurologist, and a verbal history was taken to determine if he was having seizures. Henri then said that he had had a similar event happen on January 27, 2015, when he saw Marley and his mother in the hallway. So the neurologist had to investigate 3 possibilities. The first was if he had suffered from non-epileptic seizures due to the trauma. The second was if he had epilepsy. And the third was whether he was deliberately faking a disorder. So he had an EEG study which showed that there were 10 seconds of abnormal brain activity in the 24-hour time period while he was examined. He was also recorded having abnormal jerking of his thumb and arm. So he was diagnosed with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy.
Yeah, this is a pretty rare form of epilepsy. The one big thing you notice is called juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. So it starts at a much younger age. And the fact that Henri was, 20? When he had his first seizure, makes it unlikely that it was juvenile myoclonic epilepsy.
So are you saying this doctor was lying?
I'm saying he was likely misinformed.
Well, he's the one that did the exam, right?
Yeah.
So is he just trying to say this?
He was the defense witness, correct?
Well, right. That's what I'm trying to get at, is he was paid by the defense, so maybe he was widening his horizons a bit to meet what they wanted.
I'm sure that the prosecution had their own expert.
Exactly, yes.
So it's just a pretty rare form of epilepsy. EEGs, the electroencephalogram, can be normal. Henri's showed about 10 seconds of abnormal brain activity. That doesn't mean that he was having a seizure at that point.
Well, what else would it mean?
You can see some occasional abnormal brain activity. It's just normal stuff.
Then why is it called abnormal?
Well, 10 seconds of abnormal brain activity.
So in a 24-hour period, you don't think that's significant?
No.
No. Okay, well, what about him saying that he had passed out for over 2 hours? Is that normal with a seizure? I would think not so long.
No.
Because we're not talking about a full-blown seizure here, or he would have bit his tongue or hurt himself in some way. Especially if he was on the stairs and just had a grand mal seizure. He would have been pretty injured, I would imagine.
He could have been, yeah.
Yeah. So if that had actually happened, was it likely he'd be out of it for over 2 hours?
No.
No, I didn't think so. Well, anyway, this diagnosis was used to explain Henri's demeanor on the phone, like he was in a post-ictal state. But I didn't get that from the it's not 911, but the emergency call. Did you?
Not at all.
No, I didn't get that at all. Now, he had also wet himself sometime on the morning of the murders, and the doctor said it could have happened with a seizure, but I think the witness saw the urine coming down his leg as if he was urinating at that point, right?
Yeah.
So you can certainly do that on purpose as well.
You can, although you can lose bladder control, bowel control with a seizure.
Yes.
So.
But you could also do that on purpose. So I don't see it as proof of a seizure in any shape or form, really.
Yeah, and I don't know how that is a mitigating circumstance anyway.
The seizure?
The seizure.
Well, it's just a way to explain where he was that time instead of trying to clean up the scene and all that. That's all it pretty much was. So I don't know how mitigating you would see that as being. But he needed some kind of an explanation for that time frame, that loss of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was no indication that Henri was on drugs on the morning of the murders other than that comment about his pupils. Still, there were claims by several people that he had a meth addiction. The doctor did add that a combination of drinking, stress, and lack of sleep could have caused his seizures.
Certainly.
But Henri did not say that he felt groggy on the morning of January 27th. He said that his thinking was clear, but that he was panicked. So the doctor couldn't say conclusively if the seizure could have happened after Henri attacked his family himself, or how long he could have been unconscious. But even if he had a seizure, of course, it would not prove that he did not attack his family members with the axe. Having a seizure would not make a person behave the way he did that morning. It was also brought up that Henri had made phone calls and smoked, but never tried to help any of his family members or even comfort them as they were dying. So he hadn't gone over or tried to staunch the bleeding or elevate someone's legs or, anything, or even hold their hand, for God's sake. And his only excuse for that was that he was not thinking clearly and that he was frightened. So it didn't go well for Henri.
No, on May 21st, 2018, Henri was convicted of the murders of Martin, Teresa, and Rudi, as well as the attempted murder of his sister. He was also convicted of obstructing justice by tampering with evidence. Henri showed no emotion when he was convicted, but Daniela said she had given him a tranquilizer to help keep him calm, and it must have made him sleepy. He was put into the hospital section of the prison for treatment of his epilepsy and depression.
So in June, the sentencing proceedings began. The defense presented the mitigating circumstance of his young age and the fact that he was a first-time offender. But the court did not see a lesser sentence as an option unless he were to admit what he did or show some remorse. Henri was given 3 life sentences for killing Rudi, Martin, and Teresa, 15 years for the attempted murder of Marley, and 1 year for obstruction of justice. The judge said that the attacks had shown a high degree of uncontrolled violence. The victims were unarmed and they faced an axe-wielding family member. He also said that Martin's actions to try and save Rudi were heroic. But Henri simply nodded as his sentence was handed down.
So that August, Henri's legal team appealed his conviction and sentence, but the court found that there was no reasonable possibility of a successful appeal. In 2019, all his appeals were exhausted. His sentences were concurrent, so he would have to serve 25 years before becoming eligible for parole. At that point, he'll be 48 years old. He is serving his sentence at the Pollsmoor Maximum Security Prison, located in South Africa. Pollsmoor is a maximum security facility that holds some of South Africa's most dangerous criminals. Although the prison was designed with a maximum capacity of 4,336 offenders, attended by a staff of 1,278, the current inmate population is over 7,000. My gosh, that's a huge 7,000 people.
I know, that's like an extra 3,000 people almost. So it must be pretty crowded.
Yeah, I'm sure there's good behaviors in that prison.
Wow, yeah.
This was an interesting case for observers because a motive was never proven.
That's true.
It is, but like we know, you don't need motive.
No, of course not. But it's just people like a motive, and we don't really know exactly what was going on with the family. You just wish that Marley had remembered. And then I always think, well, okay, she didn't remember the events or a few days before, but Marley must have had a fairly good idea of the family dynamics prior to that.
Yeah.
So you think she would have had some insight into the family, what was going on.
Yes, you would.
But psychologists have said that what is usually seen in cases like this is an issue with one family member above the others. So the focus for Henri, they believe, was his brother Rudi. Henri and Rudi had jealousy between them, as Rudi was the successful one and Henri had troubles. But there was never any evidence that Henri was abusing drugs. Still, there were people who came forward about Henri using and purchasing illegal drugs. The neighbor overhearing some kind of altercation between 2 males really does suggest that Rudi and Henri engaged in a fight. Maybe Henri ended up killing the others to eliminate witnesses. Or maybe Henri was going to be financially cut off by his parents. We'll never really know exactly.
Now, did they know that he had likely dropped out of school?
The family knew because they'd put him in a facility. So the parents knew at least, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Marley recovered well, and she went on to complete her education. She ended up being the sole inheritor of the family's fortune. In an episode of 60 Minutes Australia, Henri's girlfriend Daniela was interviewed, as well as an aunt who believes he is innocent. Daniela still loves Henri and claims to believe in his innocence. She didn't meet Henri until after the murders, while he was out on bail and going to chef school. When she learned who he was, she continued the relationship. But both Daniela and the aunt, who is Teresa's sister, said they would love and support Henri, even if he was guilty of the murders. The aunt even said that she had never asked Henri if he did it, and she wanted to emotionally support him regardless. Daniela said his story always made sense to her, and she knows he's not a violent person.
I don't know, when people say things like the aunt said. Now, this aunt is Teresa's sister, so Henri killed her sister, and she never even asked him if he did it and wants to support him regardless. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because Chris Porco's mother was one of the victims and still supported him. So it's just very strange to me.
Yeah, well, and then just the other statement from his girlfriend that she didn't think he was a violent person.
I know.
Well, that's pretty violent.
Well, she doesn't think he did it, she says.
Yeah, because he's not a violent person.
Well, yeah, you'd have to be a violent person to commit these axe murders. I think that's safe to say.
I think you have to have some major issues.
Yeah, and it's just impossible to explain that there was no breach of security and nothing was stolen from the home. Also, Henri's wounds were all self-inflicted knife wounds, and he had no axe wounds at all. So that doesn't make any sense. So I think they got it right this time.
I do.
Yeah, really, not too big of a mystery who did this. but interesting to look into the family dynamics and what was going on there. Also, it was a very interesting trial, not done like a trial in the U.S. So fascinating.
Yeah, it was a very interesting case.
Yeah. So now a couple of reminders before we have our listener feedback segment. We have a premium option of TCB where you can get early, ad-free, and bonus shows. In addition, we send all of our new members a gift and some TCB swag and a thank you note. So if you don't like commercials and you'd like a little extra TCB in your life, this is a great way to get it. We do a bonus show each month, and we're looking at a couple of true crime documentaries. We actually did one in October, and those are lots of fun to recap, and we have just released those for our members at this point. So if this interests you, we really would appreciate your support. You can subscribe at tiegrabber.com/subscribe, or you can get the same benefits at Patreon, going to patreon.com/tiegrabber. Other ways that we like to ask you to support the show is if you haven't already, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us to find new listeners. It's very important. We would also love to get your email or voicemail with your feedback on cases we have covered or suggestions for cases you'd like us to cover in the future. Also, if you wouldn't mind telling your friends who like true crime to give us a try, that's much appreciated. If you do find that you have feedback or case suggestions to share, you can send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. And as always, voicemails can be sent by clicking on the voicemail link in our show notes or on our website, and you can record right there from your phone, your iPad, your computer, whatever. So we thank you for whatever kind of support you're willing and able to give us.
It's time for listener feedback.
So what do we have for feedback, Dickie?
I got a couple emails and a voicemail for some case suggestions.
Let's start with an email from Alexandria. Will you read that one, Dick?
I'll do it. She says, "Hi, Jill and Dick. Thanks for your work. I appreciate your perspectives and your energy. It feels like listening to cautionary tales from your parents and breaks down all the craziness behind why we need to be mindful of others. I am a huge, unwavering fan of forensic files. One of the cases I thought was wild was the case of Brian Stidham, and I was thrilled when I heard your coverage of the case. And now I'm hoping you'll find this case interesting enough for the quiet end."
All right. Sounds good.
So, Alexandria writes, Shirley Garvin married her husband Mike Garvin, and the couple lived in Jacksonville, Florida. While they were on vacation in the Florida Keys, Mike ran some errands, and when he returned home, he found Shirley missing. But when her close friends and family members were told she was missing, they were surprised to hear that Shirley was even in Key West. Wild things begin to unravel. Forensic Files did a nice job, but the only problem with them is the fact that they have to squeeze in so much information into 25 minutes. The whole story behind the case is always much more interesting, and this case affected me.
How's that?
So I didn't want to give too much away, but yeah, I just looked up a couple things. I do have a beer recommendation, Asahi, a rice lager from Japan, but should be easy to get in the U.S. Southwest. I don't mean to sound like a creep. I'm guessing your location based on a comment made during your Carol Montecalvo piece. Cheers, team. Excellent work.
Okay. I don't find that creepy at all. We're very open about where we live, at least the state in which we live.
Yeah, we can give that up.
Yeah. So this case, I just have to say something about Forensic Files. We love it too. We don't watch it as much as we used to, but we used to have it on a lot. And whenever we travel, if they've got it at the hotel, I'll sit and watch Forensic Files. They are short, but it is really well done. And I even like the new ones even better than the older ones. So that's my comment on Forensic Files. What do we know about the case?
Well, as Alexandria said, they're on vacation in the Keys in 2003. In the afternoon, Mike ran some errands, and when he returned, Shirley had vanished. Now, following an investigation, Mike was charged with her murder, and he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. I suspect he did that to avoid the death penalty.
Okay.
He was sentenced to life without parole.
Yeah. So this is kind of a Dick and Jill case, right? The husband-wife situation. We do enjoy those. I don't know what that says about us or our relationship, but they do seem to be our favorite. And I think mostly it's just I like to talk about relationships, how people get together, how the relationship goes, and then what leads to this horrible stuff happening, right?
I know.
It's just shocking. I mean, I always think to the fact that pregnant women, the leading cause of death for them is to be murdered by their fetus's father, by the father of their baby. That's shocking if you think about it. More than car accidents, drug overdoses, or even complications of a pregnancy. It's really amazing. So you just wonder how two people can fall in love and be best friends, and then something like this can happen. I don't think I'll ever not be fascinated by that. So that's a case that I will definitely look into. So thank you, Alexandria.
And just one quick mention. Yes, Asahi is a nice beer. But what I try to do when I'm doing these episodes is pick a beer from the state where the crime occurred.
Yeah, maybe we should do a Japanese case. We have never done that.
So, yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
That's one.
Yeah.
But when we do this case, I'll be picking a Florida beer.
Of course, yes, we understand that. Understood. We will not hold that against you whatsoever. But I think I've had that beer at restaurants, right? That's a pretty common beer. Yeah, and then doesn't one of our daughter's sister-in-laws work for that company or something? Or did work for it?
Well, there's a lot of degrees of separation here, but...
Right. It doesn't really matter who it is, but they did work for...
Yeah, our daughter's brother-in-law worked for the company and did quite well. They were located in Houston.
Right, and they got to travel to Japan.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be great. I'd like to do that one day. Never been there. But I think I'm going to look for a case there because I think that would be really interesting.
Could be.
Yeah.
It's got potential.
Certainly does. So we have an email from Nate who says he's our biggest fan. And I think you're right, Nate. I think you are our biggest fan. And we do appreciate you. So he writes, I hope the weather is milder in the Southwest now that fall has arrived. Thank you. It is much milder. He has 2 suggestions of movies to watch that are based on true crime cases. So that's great. The first one is Richard Jewell, based on the 1996 Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta, Georgia. I've seen that movie, Nate. It was great, and I would watch it again. That one has the actor who played that serial killer with the Burnsides. Remember that? Yeah, same actor played Richard Jewell, and he is great. The other one, Brian Banks, which is based on the true story of Brian Banks, a high school football player who was wrongfully convicted of rape and later exonerated by the Innocence Project in California. That would be great. I really would like to do some more exonerations. That's something we rarely do. I do have a couple on our list for the future, but that would be great. Also, it might be nice not to do a murder all the time. We've done 2 or 3 that weren't a murder, but it is rare. So in 2002, Brian Banks, a high school student, was accused of rape by another student. In order to avoid a possible lengthy sentence, he took a plea deal, and Banks served a total of 5 years. On his release, he had to register as a sex offender, and he wore an ankle bracelet. Then his alleged victim contacted him through Facebook, and eventually she admitted to fabricating the entire story. So yeah, that would be really interesting, don't you think?
Yeah, those are interesting cases to do.
All right. Well, thank you, Nate. And we have 1 voicemail you want me to play?
I have 1 voicemail. Actually, I have 2. And one was from Rui, a nice woman in South Africa, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's the one I'm supposed to listen to because you had trouble understanding.
She has a case that she wants us to do, which sounds like a very interesting case, but I just could not understand the name of the perpetrator.
Okay. Well, if she's listening, maybe she will write into us or leave another voicemail and spell it or something. But I haven't listened to it either yet, so maybe I'll be able to figure it out when I listen.
Maybe you will be, but I think it'd be an interesting one to do.
Okay, great. So hopefully she'll get back to us with the name if I can't figure it out. Okay, so let's listen to Jennifer's voicemail.
Hi, Dick and Jill. I hope you are doing well. I really don't like leaving voicemail messages, but I'm doing this because you all encourage us to do so, and I enjoy you all very much. I'm just a new Patreon, although I've been listening to you for a long time. I have a case suggestion that I did not see when I tried to do a search, although the Patreon app is not the easiest app to use. It's Brian Schaefer. He's from Columbus. He was from Columbus, Ohio. Well, we presume that he's not with us. He's a missing Ohio State University Medical Center med student. I thought the med student would appeal to Dick, that went missing after an evening having drinks with his friends. I don't want to go into too much detail on it because it would give away the whole thing, but it's kind of an intriguing case, and there's a lot of different ideas people have about where he might be or what may have happened to Brian. And I just got done listening to Dr. Swango, who had an OSU Medical Center tie, and it's one of your old issues or old episodes, and it was just crazy. That is a crazy story, and I'm very grateful that Dr. Swango was not there when I was a neurosurgery patient, or that he was not there when I was actually an employee at Ohio State Medical Center. But getting back to Brian Schaefer, he was in school during the time that my daughter was attending Ohio State, so they're kind of, if he's still living, he would be around my daughter's age. And as far as beers go, Columbus, Ohio has some great breweries, and because of listening to you, my husband and I have started sampling different things that we may not have that are outside our old comfort zone for beer, and we're kind of having fun with it. So, you should have no problem finding something here if you decide to do this story. And if you need it picked up, please give me a call. My name's Jennifer L. on your Patreon. So take care. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. So it is fun to taste the beers, and it's really, I like it that you were able to get someone to do that, able to introduce some people to that. When someone writes in and says something like that, I always think, well, there's got to be at least 10 or 20 people having the same experience. So it's just a great thing because I enjoy going out and tasting some beers, and it's probably something I never would have done if Dick and I weren't together.
You see what I've done for you.
You've done a lot for me. So thanks for that, Jennifer.
As she said, there's some good breweries in Columbus. There's Columbus Brewing Company and Wolf's Ridge Brewing. Those are the ones that I've had beers from. We'll be able to find a good Ohio beer for you.
All right, great. So I actually heard of the Brian Schaefer case back when it happened in 2006, I remember. And it's actually a case that has gotten a lot of attention from podcasters and true crime blogs and all that kind of stuff. But it's a very fascinating case, and I think it's worth taking a look at it. I don't think it's been overdone. It's something that's still unsolved, which makes it interesting and something that people should keep looking at. From what I do remember, there were some things that make it very curious, which I won't give that away either, in case any of our listeners haven't heard of it. But yeah, that's definitely a case that's worth an episode as far as I'm concerned. Yeah,
because there's been several possible sightings.
Yes.
Of him over the years. So that's the fascinating thing. It's not like here this guy disappeared and there's been no trace of him since.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, there's some nefarious circumstances going on, too, that people have speculated about.
Right.
Kind of reminds me of, what's the name of the college girl that disappeared? Maura Murray. Reminds me a little of Maura Murray, and that there are so many people that speculating about it and what happened. And I find that fascinating. I don't think you can really overdo that until it is solved, actually, to be honest with you. So thank you, Jennifer and Nate and Alexandria, for your input today. We really appreciate it very much. And thank you to everyone listening today. We really appreciate you joining us down at the Quietet, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.